Now that we've done a lot of setup about troubles with the religious settlement and the papal bull, right? This relationship between Elizabeth and Catholics, we know it's breaking down. Elizabeth's, should we say, excommunication by the Pope means that Catholics in England have, should we say, this reason to dislike her. And frankly, all of the reactions Elizabeth made led to a series of events to encourage Catholicism and also to remove Elizabeth. You need to know a little bit about the threat this brought to Elizabeth's life, particularly the revolts, which we've already covered, the Northern Rebellion, the Rodolphi plot, and another one which we'll come up to with Mary. But the one that I'm going to talk about here today is the Jesuits. And we need to understand what they do, but also how does Elizabeth react, and what does that prove to us about how Elizabeth reacts. See, the leader of the Jesuits is a guy called Edmund Campion, or at least he was one of the leaders, right? These are missionaries trying to spread Catholic messages. He is going to Britain specifically to make Britain more Catholic. He is going to convince people, he's going to give out pamphlets, he's going to preach, he's going to speak to try and get rid of Elizabeth. Now, he actually snuck into England disguised as a jewel merchant, right? He actually pretended to be something he wasn't because it was already so anti-Jesuit. Now, you can predict what happened to him, right? Once it was clear that this man was here to stay and was here to do one thing and one thing only, he became a wanted man. He was encouraging rebellion against Elizabeth. He was basically a problem. Now, at this point, I asked classes to choose what's going on with this, but you need to know how Elizabeth reacts. See, Campion has a series of events happen to him that really prove to us Elizabeth's reaction towards Jesuits. See, he was captured, just like, let's say, arrested by a normal thing. We don't need to know the full story there, but he was tortured and imprisoned once that happened. 4 months on should we call it, a thing called the rack, a torture device. You can see it above my head at the top here. They stretched Campion on this thing for 4 months to try and get information about the other Jesuits and any other plans to remove Elizabeth and install Catholicism yet again in England. That proves to us that, should we say, this is being taken seriously. This is really scary for Elizabeth, or maybe even that they really hated Jesuits. And then, once he's found guilty of treason, he is hung, drawn and quartered. Now, I performed the hung, drawn and quartered routine for my classes, but it is a very, very medieval way of showing everyone that this is the most painful way to die. You are dragged by a horse, you are hung until just about dead, you are disemboweled, your organs removed from your body, and then you're cut into quarters and your pieces are shown to everyone around the country to essentially show that this is what you get for going against the Queen. See, this is the thing that, does that make Catholics, should we say, go against Elizabeth more, or does that make Catholics, should we say, fear Elizabeth? That tension is what you need to be able to describe. They would probably be scared of her because of this, but they are probably not scared of her because of other things. And annoyingly enough for Elizabeth, there is another group that, well, come into the picture. They are not Catholics, they are the Puritans. You've actually heard about the Puritans before in Migration with the Pilgrim Fathers, as you might remember. They get kicked out of Britain eventually because everyone hates them. But we need to talk about their beginnings. The Puritans are not Catholic. They are Protestants. They are extreme Protestants. They are taking Protestantism to a violent extreme. They essentially believe that that simple method of living is the only way that anyone should live. They've done some crazy things, frankly. They've banned Christmas before. They wanted to ban reading and music and banned eating of turkey. Like, they've whipped people if they commit sin. They've killed children who've sworn. They are an extremist group, and they are taking things to a religious extreme. Because Elizabeth, who's trying to find a middle way between Catholics and Protestants, well, the Puritans don't want Catholics to even exist in England. They want them killed and removed because they're heretics, according to the Puritans. So that causes problems for Elizabeth in a number of different ways. So not just Catholics, but Protestants as well are getting on her nerves. And as well as getting on her nerves, this is how I'm going to just explain who they are, because this is the key basic information you need to know about what threats the Puritans posed. So firstly, a nice way to remember them is that they are unwilling to compromise. It's hard to change an extremist mindset, and they are like, no, that is just not the way the thing works. This is why they get kicked out of Britain eventually. They are extremists. Now, they want the removal of Catholics. They don't want anything to be Catholic. They don't want this uniformity or supremacy because those allow Catholics to exist. some of the ways that we can see that argument, that well, their problems with Elizabeth. So there was a Catholic element of a religious priest wearing an item to identify them as a priest, this thing called a surplice. And essentially many Puritans backed off of this. They disliked this and actually called for bishops to be removed after it. A group called the Presbyterians stick out, and they basically are a really dedicated group of extreme Protestants, but they would go to a thing called a prophesying, where essentially they go and complain about Elizabeth in public. They would sit there and complain about all of her religious elements that she sees as very successful. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who is the one of the heads of the Church of England, or at least the priest in charge of the Church of England, he supported prophesying. And, well, once Elizabeth heard this, she suspended him from that job. She got rid of him, leader of English Church, because he supported this idea of complaining about her. And what Puritans ended up doing after this is that they started to try and separate and create their own denominations as well. They started creating new separate churches to try and essentially go, well, if your church isn't accepting of our Puritan beliefs, then we'll make our own church. And Elizabeth, already probably sick of all of the religious ideas you've probably heard of, started to arrest and hang the people responsible for it. As well as this, there are Puritan MPs who are trying to change laws to help Puritans outside of just the religious way of doing stuff, and even Francis Walsingham, the spymaster, right, is a Puritan himself. Her actions on law towards Puritans were reduced, probably, and that's why the Pilgrim Fathers leave much after Elizabeth has died. But she was banning prophesying, she was banning preaching from, should we say, Puritans. And in fact, actually, Puritans who refused to attend church were also given recusancy fines and were imprisoned. And even their books that they were printing to share their Puritan ideas were being, well, the printers were being, should we say, destroyed or banned. They could not make their books to sell. And one guy even got his hand cut off because he didn't like the idea of a Catholic marriage. You can tell that religion is a really important thing for Elizabeth by the way she's reacting. This is the source of her rebellion, the troubles at home. And if you can identify the Catholic threat from inside Britain and the Puritan threat, but also how Elizabeth reacts to both of them, then you know enough for this section. Thanks for listening, guys. Sorry for the edits in the middle, but good luck.